Okay. Well, I guess I'll start. So before I start this introduction to homeopathy, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself. I went through a naturopathic program here in Oregon, and I knew nothing of homeopathy when I started back in 1998. And I was introduced to homeopathy the first year, and I saw some pretty amazing things happen with homeopathy. So I became what we call in naturopathic circles a homeo head, where I spent a lot more time studying homeopathy than any other modality because I saw a lot of promise in it. Since then, I've been out practicing for 7 years, and I've been teaching homeopathy for about 3.5 to 4 years to graduate level students. So you have to bear with me a little bit. I'm used to people kind of having an understanding or a grasp of homeopathy, so I've tried to make it as simple to understand as possible. And if you have any questions at all, please ask, and I'll clarify whatever I can. Okay. So with this introduction to homeopathy, I first have to read this disclaimer that this course or this training here, this introduction, does not train or allow you to diagnose or treat disease. If you have a state-recognized license, you can do that. But this isn't intended for that. You may only diagnose and treat disease if you have a state-recognized license to do so. Okay. With that said, people use homeopathy, laypersons use homeopathy all the time, all over the world, with effect. Okay? So it's really a matter of knowing what you're dealing with so that you don't miss something or, something untoward happens. So I wanted to start, if you're going to study homeopathy, there's two big names that you're going to hear about. You're going to hear about Dr. Samuel Hahnemann, who is the founder of homeopathy, and you're going to hear about James Tyler Kent, who was one of the most prominent homeopaths of the 1800s. Okay? So and one of the things he says in one of his talks, he says, the wise person is always happy. He's grown wise while loving and is loved while acquiring knowledge. And peace, happiness, and contentment are upon the face of all who live for the good of the human race. You're going to find this outlook on life and on wellness in this bunch of people, in homeopaths. One of the beautiful things about homeopathy is that you can address people's suffering without fighting. In the allopathic model, it's about countering something. It's about going against something. In the homeopathic model, it's about understanding the patient's or the person's experience and then matching that experience to something in the natural world. All right? So what I'm going to try to do here is cover what is homeopathy, the history, a very brief history of homeopathy, and who practices homeopathy, how it can be practiced, because there's many different ways that homeopathic medicines are applied these days. Okay, and what can homeopathy do? Okay, homeopathy itself is an art and a science by itself. There are people that have spent their entire lives, 50, 60, 70 years studying homeopathy, and there's still more to learn. Okay. And it was, homeopathy as we know it now was developed about 200 years ago. And basically what a substance can cause in a susceptible, healthy person, it can cure in a sick person when prepared homeopathically. Hahnemann himself, he was a scientist. He received his medical degree and he practiced medicine for several years before he realized that he wasn't doing much good. And a lot of the therapies that he learned 210 years ago hurt more people than he helped. And also he realized that he wouldn't put his family members through these procedures. So why would he do that to other people? So he stopped practicing medicine. One of the first substances that he proved homeopathically was cinchona. And what they were doing was taking quinine out of the cinchona bark, this Peruvian bark, and they were using it to treat malaria. So he thought to himself, he theorized, well, if I take this quinine or the cinchona bark and I expose myself to it in dilute doses, what will happen? And so he did that. And he realized he didn't develop malaria, but he developed the feeling of the fever, the chills, all of the things that are characteristic symptoms of malaria. He developed as long as he was exposing himself to this. So he thought, well, if this is causing this in me and I don't have malaria, what happens if I give this substance to somebody who does have it and their symptoms match identically? And that was the beginning for him. Okay. And there's a principle here that we're looking at of universality. What is out there in the natural world can cure what is suffering on the inside. Okay? In homeopathy, we make homeopathic medicines out of any substance, whether they come from the plant kingdom or the animal kingdom, or they come from the mineral kingdom. Okay? And we even have remedies called imponderables. We've got remedies made out of electricity, X-ray, moonlight. Okay? So it's a very important thing to understand that when a human being suffers, because we're not separate from this universe we live in, there are things out in the natural world that we can turn into medicines and use them to relieve the suffering inside of us. All right? And it's based on the universal principle of, in Latin, it's simillimos similibus curantur, which means like cures like. Okay? This was elucidated by Hippocrates, who is considered the father of medicine, in the 5th century BCE. And what I want to say here is he didn't come up with this idea. The idea of like cures like, it's analogous to the laws of physics. We can study them, but nobody's really created them. They're there for us to understand and study and abide by. But regardless of how we behave, we can't change it. Okay? It's inherent in the natural world. And then in the 1790s, Samuel Hahnemann rediscovers this universal phenomenon and begins to study it in earnest for several years before writing The Organon of Medicine. People have been studying this organon that Hahnemann wrote 200 years ago. And there's always something new to understand about it. I have a copy of it right here. Many people have published it. They've translated it from German into English. And it's the foundation of homeopathy. It lays out the principles as to how homeopathy works, why we do what we do, what we should expect. It's our guidebook. Okay? And the beautiful thing about homeopathy is that this guidebook of these principles have not changed in 200 years. That's how reliable they are. Nobody's able to improve upon them in these 200 years. Okay. A couple words about Hahnemann. He was a medical doctor, but he was also a botanist, he was a naturalist, and he was a chemist. Okay. He was conversant in at least 11 languages. This is why when he gave up practicing medicine, when it wasn't doing what he thought it would do, he started translating books. And he was translating Latin into German or Latin into some other language. And this is when he came across the maxim of like cures like. And that's when it stuck with him and he started to think about it and ponder it. And he came up with homeopathy based on this that he came across. There is a national monument dedicated to him in Washington, D.C. that was dedicated in 1910. We have the Hahnemann School, medical school in Philadelphia, which was named after him. At in the turn of the 18th and 19th century, the 19th to 20th century, we had about 22 homeopathic colleges throughout the country. Okay. And he lived to the age of 87, which was pretty old for his time. And that's a picture of the monument. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about